right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Author Story, the home of authors and stories that matter. I'm your host, Alexander Lim, and this episode's featured guest is Toby Weston, who is the author of the Singularity's children's series. So, Toby, welcome to Author Story. Thank you very much for being with us.
Hi, Alex. Yeah, great to be here. Thanks very much for the opportunity and the invitation. I'm looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. It's great to hear you. Okay, so first off, I'd like to get into your background. You're involved in IT right now, right? Information technology.
That's right.
Right. Did you have any idea when you were growing up that you would get involved in technology? I mean, just even the vaguest idea that you'd be involved with this stuff.
Yes, I guess so. I think,
Nice.
I got two brothers. One of them is 2 years younger than me. The other is 10 years younger.
Hmm.
So my younger, or the middle brother, we grew up together, and we were always like, parents always talk about what their kids want to do, like what do you want to do when you grow up, and
Right,
he
right.
always knew he wanted to be a doctor from
Uh-huh,
a very
uh-huh.
early age. And
Okay.
I think I knew I wanted to be a scientist from a
Ah,
very early age.
okay.
And I dabbled a bit along the way. I've been in academia a little bit, but back then, I'm pretty old, not quite 50, but just about.
All
And
right.
when we were growing up, there wasn't really, you know, there. I remember my parents sometimes saying, "Yeah, he's a computer programmer," and that
Mm-hmm.
was like a bit of an an awe-inspiring profession. But
Right,
no,
right.
I never wanted to be a computer programmer. But yeah, I wanted to be a scientist, and
Mm-hmm.
I read so much sci-fi that's what I wanted to do, sci-fi, but not necessarily write it, but yeah,
Mm-hmm.
somehow build it, make it real.
Right, okay. So we'll go into the sci-fi later, but I have to ask, as someone who's been working in IT, I'm sure quite a few listeners might want to know this, a bit of a sidebar. In your opinion, what's the
Sure.
most interesting that is coming up right now in IT?
I mean, it's AI. Simply,
Oh, okay.
AI is absolutely mind-blowing at the moment,
Wow.
and
Okay.
a, a lot of people don't agree.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Like AI has been, it's one of these things, it's a bit like nuclear fusion.
Mm-hmm.
People
Mm-hmm.
have been saying for years that it's going to change things, and it never quite delivers, or people don't think it delivers, even though they sort of just get used to its effects.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it's absolutely crazy now.
Mm-hmm.
Something called GPT-3,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
that if your listeners might want to do a Google on, it's the latest algorithm,
Wow.
that just sort of, it can do anything, like
Mm-hmm.
literally it knows everything, it can do anything, and pretty soon when it's going to be in every fridge and mobile phone, it's
Mm-hmm.
going to be pretty freaky.
All right. Okay. Okay. All right. And that's actually, yeah. Okay. All right. I won't get. I'm trying to get sidetracked here with Hal in 2001, but I'll stay on the topic here. All
It's
right.
fine. I mean, it all merges in together actually, because it's a lot of
Uh,
what I write about. So I'm happy
okay.
to chat
Cool.
about AI and IT as well, because for me it's all one big, super interesting bundle of ideas and possibilities.
Right. Okay. So, all right. So, talking a little bit on AI then. I mean, a a lot of science fiction stories, quite a few of them are like I don't know how to call it, the science fiction horror genre, where the rogue AI goes crazy and the stuff like that. Um,
Yeah.
you know, it has to be asked, there a possibility that something like this might happen?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
uh, definitely. And like all sorts of permutations around that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if in many ways, if you think about what's happening at the moment
Mm-hmm.
in the world with, Facebook, fake
Right.
news,
Right.
Twitter, what have you, the algorithms know what people respond to,
Mm-hmm.
and they just give you more of what people are responding to. And if
Mm-hmm.
people are responding to sort of anger and outrage, the algorithms give us anger and outrage. And
Mm-hmm.
in a way, it's an AI, and
Mm-hmm.
it's an AI that, it doesn't want to take over the world because it wants its own island and wants to be, some sort of Bond villain,
Right.
but
Right.
it's sort of destroying the world and fighting us,
Mm-hmm.
if you think of it that way, which I sort of do.
Right.
Um, just because it's a byproduct of its programming. The person who programmed it wasn't careful enough, and so it's just sort of as a side goal, it's sort of just destroying Western democracy. It's making some money for people, so nobody's really complaining. But that's how it's going to go. It'll probably be, somebody might make one in the military that just starts, attacking, but more likely it's going to be some weird sort of edge case where you hadn't expected it, and you wake up one morning and suddenly something very weird has happened, and it's AI. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So it's so it's sort of like we're gonna, if something like weird, in your words, something weird does happen, it's not expected. It's not going to be an expected result.
No, it might be. We might be getting, like, our minds might be broadening now, and our imagination's getting wider, because people are starting to realize that some of this stuff that's happening now, the algorithms are dangerous. And so I think our sort of appreciation of the danger of AI is maturing. As you said, like up until quite recently, it was just a big robot with laser eyes marching all over cities.
Right.
But now it's a bit more subtle. It's the films that are coming out, and even the newspaper stories. So I think it might not be as unexpected anymore, because I think in a way we're almost in the middle of it.
Okay. All right. Well, very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so let me get a little bit back into the book. I mean, these are science fiction novels. So, who were your influences when you were growing up? I mean, in particular, where science fiction is concerned.
I read Douglas Adams was the second book I ever read, and I couldn't read. I wasn't interested in reading. I was at school and was being a bit of a problem at school, and my parents didn't really know what to do. And then one summer I was bored and there was nothing to do, and I saw a book and the cover was quite appealing, and when I started reading it, I basically couldn't read. I was about 8 or 9, so quite old to not be able to read.
Right.
And then that was it. And then that was it. I just every single science fiction book that I could find, I read.
Wow.
And so that meant the ones that were available. So it was Arthur C. Clarke, and Isaac Asimov, and Heinlein, and then Frank Herbert, Dune. And so I just read everything. And I pretty much I don't read everything anymore. I don't have the time. I'm writing for a start, but I did. I read everything. Everything let's say pre-1980. I've read pretty much of everything pre-1980, although I didn't like all the authors. So Philip K. Dick I never really liked for some reason. And like Stanislaw Lem, I did like a bit, but sometimes I found the more psychedelic sort of 70s American sci-fi. I couldn't really, maybe just because I was young and I didn't know that they were talking about drugs the whole time, and I just couldn't understand what the heck was going on.
Right.
Maybe I should go back and try them again. But yeah, I read a lot.
Okay.
And then Ian M. Banks and all the British ones in the 90s, Neil Stephenson, Charles Stross, and I try and still read all the good ones.
Nice. And I mean, was there any one author that really stuck out for you? I mean, it's really an influence on you, or is your style essentially like, you got all these authors and it just came together?
My style.
Yeah. I mean, or what your influences? Sorry, your influences.
Well, I mean, it's they're both valid and related questions, and it's really interesting. I do find that if I've just read a book by one of the authors I really like, it's difficult not to find that creeping into my style. But there's nothing really deliberate about my style. It's try and be as informal and sort of direct and communicating as sort of tersely as possible, as much information as few words, and try to communicate the comedy as well, comedy and locations, and just to be really conservative with the number of words I use. And but apart from that, I don't really try and do anything. But I do find it's impossible not to be influenced by the authors I love, and it is quite difficult when you've just finished reading a book you like not to find yourself writing the odd sentence that probably is a a pale comparison, but still it's in the vein of whoever you've just been reading. So Ian M. Banks would be my favourite author, and Neil Stevenson. I love The Diamond Age and Cryptonomicon and Snow Crash, for example. So those are fantastic books, but many others as well. Werner Vinge and Charles Stross, I really enjoy and am influenced by those. Not so much the older ones anymore. So like the Asimov and the Arthur C. Clarke, somehow I wouldn't be interested in writing those stories anymore, because they've really been written and then filmed and then discussed, and then The Simpsons has done it, and then by then it's sort of, you've got all the mileage you can out of the idea.
Right. Okay, cool. All right, so just for the sake of our listeners, there are two kinds of science fiction. There's what's called hard science fiction, where the story is really based on technology or possible technology. And there's science fiction that's called soft science fiction, which is more fantastic, for lack of a better word, in nature. So one example of like soft science fiction would be like the Star Wars series and the Star Trek series. I'm sure you're aware of this, Toby. So how would you describe your writing? Would it be more along the lines of hard science fiction, or would it be more along the lines of soft science fiction?
So definitely hard science fiction.
All right.
But there's a spectrum, even there's a spectrum across the whole of the genre. But my books have got like talking seagulls, for example.
Okay.
Or, which you might not consider to be like, people might argue that that's not very hard science fiction, but but everything that, as far as I'm concerned, everything that I write should be conceivable. The world might not turn out to work this way, but at the moment, it's a fair guess I'm making. I'm not claiming I'm right about all of the science fiction technologies that I write into the book, but I wouldn't write anything that was absolutely clearly, wrong or magic. So I personally think that animals are pretty smart, and I think that one of the main reasons we don't think they are is because we can't talk to them, and simply having some sort of language interface that was sort of common and very easy to use for both man and animal, and then if the animals were used to it and could start talking to each other and start making transactions based upon, let's say, cryptocurrencies and smart contracts, where a seagull is helping a dolphin to spot a shoal of fish, and they've got a way of communicating. I think, because animals just want to survive and they're lazy and they just want to eat, that if they were given technology in a form that they could digest, they would use it. And so that's a way of answering your question. So I'm not at all afraid to take sort of wacky, quite far out ideas, about consciousness or whatever, which are certainly at the limit of what science is prepared to talk about. And I'm prepared to write stories about them. I haven't decided whether faster than light travel will be possible in my books or not. And some people would say, if you've got faster than light travel, it's not hard sci-fi because you can't travel faster than the speed of light, because Einstein says. And I'm like, well, that's what he said, but people have said a lot of things over the past 40,000 years, and a lot of that's turned out to be wrong. So if I want to write a book about it, I will. But if I do, I'll be consistent, and I won't have it happening in one book and then suddenly not possible because of some weird, contrived situation in another. So I try and be consistent, and I try and work within what I think is conceivable, but I really do push up against the edge of what is conceivable.
Okay. All right. Cool. Got that. Okay. So the Singularity sChildren series. I mean, it came out. The first book is Denial. It came out in 2016. And the fourth book is Reimagination, which is coming out later this year. Well, as far as this interview is concerned.
It's pre-release already, actually. Okay. And so by the 21st of August, you should be able to buy it.
Nice. Okay. So I have to ask, did you ever think that you'd become a novelist? I mean, was this something you really wanted to do, or is this something that just kind of happened?
And I think I've known for quite a long time that it would be very nice if I could become. And and I think when I was about 19, so very many years ago, I started writing a book, and even sent off a few chapters, and got a polite reply back, but nothing came from it. But yeah, it's only really I've considered again, because I've got a job, and so I write part-time.
All right.
And it was only really in the last couple of years with all this self-publishing, and I mean it's been more than a couple of years now, but I started writing probably 8 years ago now. The book probably started about 8 years ago, and so back then it was still relatively fresh, and I thought, yeah, why not write it, and then see how the new sort of Kindle self-published world works. And so that's when I got serious about it again. So I guess there was sort of a 20-year gap in the middle.
Right. Okay. Well, and I mean, we've got the results right now. 4 books, well, 3 books out, and the 4th one coming out. So that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people seem to like them, so I'm very, very happy.
Yeah. All right. So okay. So about the series, I mean, first off, the concept. How did you come up with the concept behind the series? I mean, okay. Well, first let's talk a little bit about what the series is all about. What is the series all about?
So it's basically it's not set in our world, but only really because I never really felt comfortable writing things like Pepsi or McDonald's or even the names of real people. And if I wanted to write something that starts about now, which the series does, and then runs for sort of 30 years into the future, which is the idea of the book, of the books. I don't want to say what happens to Justin Bieber in 20 years, and I don't want to have to, when I'm doing my world building, I didn't want to be constrained by, well, what happens if this technology turns out to not be true before I've written the second book. So I thought I would create a world that is very similar to ours. It's sort of like the conceit would be that there was one world war rather than two, and some point in the last, I haven't even decided, but certainly somewhere between 30,000 years ago and 100 years ago, the world's differed, and so there's the book's called it's not called 1984, it's called 1995, I think. It was written a year later. Oh, I can't actually. When did he write it? He wrote 1984 in 1948, right? So it'd be 1994. The book would be called 1994. So, I do silly little things like that just to show that it's not quite the same world as ours. Okay, so that's the world, and then the idea is just to take it from where we are. And I started writing, a few years ago now. So we weren't actually in the middle of sort of a dystopian nightmare, but in my book, that's pretty much where it starts off. There's no pandemic, but there's an economic collapse. And then the idea really is to show that there is a positive future, and there's things that need to be done, and there's goodies and baddies, and not in very similar to the problems that we face. How do the characters, how is it going to be to live through the next 30 years, and what are some adventure stories that I can tell in that time? And I wanted to leave the series, which I think I've done now, in a place where we're in space. We've got all sorts of like high technology, and if I want to, I can write books with spaceships and other planets and possibly other stars, and not start there and have to worry about what happened before and how they got there, because we know how they got there. So that's really it's a big world building adventure story arc. That's the motivation.
All right, great. And from the sound of it sounds like these 4 books, they seem to be like the platform for possible stories that you can create in the future. And these stories can cover generations in different places.
Definitely, and even in the present or the past. And I'm sort of thinking about writing some slightly less science fiction-y, but still in the same world, where there can just be a few little weird things that are interesting and a bit unusual, but apart from that, just fairly standard human interaction stories about people, like you'd get in like non-sci-fi. Basically, I'm quite tempted by writing some stories that pop into my head that aren't very sci-fi, but if I did it, I think I would write them all in this world.
Nice, cool. All right. So a little bit about the book. I mean, of course, since we want people to buy it, you shouldn't tell everything about it. But first off, who are some of the protagonists in this book, and what are they about essentially?
So it's multiple storylines, multiple threads.
Okay.
There's some boys growing up in Europe, and their parents are affected by the collapse, the economic downturn. There's a young girl on a sort of a floating tuna farm, who becomes an orphan, and she has a very tough life. There's the son of a tuna sushi sort of chain billionaire who is disgusted by the environmental degradation that he sees that his family is partly responsible for. So there's different people, and they start off, and they obviously, as the books progress, they come together.
Right.
And you've got, some of them are affiliated with the more traditional corporate type of power structures, and then others are trying to slip between the cracks and get things bootstrapping and starting in like a maker type culture where you're building stuff and helping each other, and then it's their different lives and how they help each other and fight against each other. And then in the background there's technologies changing, politics are changing, and that's the sort of I don't want to give too much away.
Yeah, of course, but okay. And I mean,
but the names,
go ahead.
Just quickly, the names come from like a book that gets, like, when the guy's clearing his desk right at the start, he's got some sort of corporate self-help type book, where it's where the stages of disruption are denial, disruption, conflict, and reimagination. So this is the 4 stages of corporate disruption, and that's where then the books sort of come from, because it's the disruption that's going to happen to our society like it happens to theirs, and how at the end you have the complete reimagination of a lot of what we took for granted because of the things that have changed over the course of the books.
Right. Okay. And with the cast this big, I mean, how do you keep tabs on them, and how do you make sure that things stay consistent throughout these 4 books? I mean, I'm thinking with a whole bunch of characters that you have to keep tabs on, like as you mentioned, the various threads, and you're creating essentially a single story with these 4 books. How do you manage these things?
It is very difficult, to be fair.
Right.
And also my writing was developing as I was writing. So when I started writing, I hadn't really written before, so I didn't really have any concept of how to answer that question. If you'd asked me that then, I wouldn't have known. And it's, I mean, as if any of your listeners are authors or they've thought about this, a story that you can explain quite quickly, when you start writing it, it just is so dry and uninteresting when it's just he did this, she did that, this happened, then that happened, and so then you keep realizing, I've got to add a chapter there, or I can't start there because that needs the background exposition. So I found that I was writing backwards, I've been writing for a year, and the story is less developed than it was before because I've had to keep writing additional chapters at the beginning and things like that. So very, very messy. The first 2 books I wrote them, and it wasn't 2 books, it was a single book at the time, and it just kept getting longer and more sprawling. So I had to just brutally edit the heck out of it. and then separate it into 2 books. And then for the 3rd and the 4th book, I was much more structured. So I've got like a wiki on my website. So if people want to, they can join as a member. It's free on my website, but there's an area on my website called members, where I've got like a dramatis persona. And when I write a book, I'm writing a new one now. I start to make notes and put the characters' names and things, and that way I've got everything in one place. And I've got lots of notes and bits of paper, but I use Evernote a lot to collect stuff. But I'm much more structured than I used to be, and I write lots of stuff down, record lots of audio, digitize the audio to be notes. I don't actually write the book with dictation, but a lot of the notes I write as audio and then have it sort of automatically transcribed so I can file it away. So yeah, copious note keeping, lots of planning, but I still never really know what's going to happen until I start writing, and then it evolves.
Okay, all right. So I guess we've already touched on one of the hardest things concerned with writing the series. For you then, what would be, let's go the opposite. For you, what would be the easiest thing about, writing out these series?
Well, I don't know about easiest, because I don't know whether it is easy, but it's the most fun bit is the just thinking up the world and the stories. And it's I play with Lego, or I used to play with Lego. I mean, I've got kids and they're a bit too old for Lego now, and when I was younger I used to play with it myself. But it's like you've got these pieces and you can slot them together, and you're making the pieces because they're the people and they're the plot elements and they're the world. And sometimes it's just they come together in such a great way, like where you can have something that happened to somebody in one book and then they get their comeuppance in another through a really sort of like poetic way that features that thing, whatever it was. That type of thing is like, it's really difficult because it's a lot of thinking, but most of it is subconscious and it just pops into my head. And then I so that's what I like the most, and that's what's in a way the easiest, but it's also the thing that you've got least control over. And if it just stops coming, then you've got nothing to put in the books anymore. So it can be nerve-wracking as well.
Okay. All right, cool, great. Okay, so Toby, we're winding down this interview right now. I mean, very fascinating, but so I'll give this over to you in the last minute or so of this interview. Is there anything you'd like to say? Tell our listeners that would maybe inspire them, or maybe we want them to get the series.
Well, I think that we need hope at the moment. We need to believe that there is a positive future, and we need to stop being sold to and marketed to by people that don't care that we don't want to buy what they're selling us. And we need to be totally aware that persuasive technologies, persuasion engineers, this is like the jungle we live in now, and what looks like a leaf is not a leaf. It's some sort of specialist machine that's been constructed to make you buy whatever it is. It's been very bizarrely metaphorical, but the environment around us is no longer in any way natural. It's created by people that want us to do what they want to do, whether it's buy their product or vote for them. So I think it's really important that we have some sort of sense of human goal, like what is it that we want as a society, as a species, as a planet, or even as a country. It doesn't even matter, or as a village, as long as it's a genuine thing that you want, and it's not, you don't want it just because somebody's told it you. Some sort of positive hope for the future, I think, is really desperately needed now. And just to tie that very quickly back to my book, the first one starts in a pretty bleak place, and I think it's worth noting that, because when I wrote it, the world wasn't as bleak, and I needed some contrast. I think if I'd been writing it now, I might start with book 2, and and if somebody who wants to be a new reader, feel free to start at book 2, because in the middle of a pandemic sort of global depression, I don't think we need any more sort of stories of economic hardship, and that's pretty much where book one starts. So yeah, I think we've got to think positive and know that humans are, being good to other humans and having some sort of positive vision for the future is really important.
Right. Nice. Cool. Okay. Got that.
Can I say one more thing?
Oh, sure. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Can I just say one more thing quickly?
Go ahead.
This is just a bit of a weird left field thing to say.
Okay.
There's another author called Toby Weston who writes German pornography.
Okay.
So I just want to make clear to any new readers that there are two Toby Westons. So if you do
right.
Google me and you suddenly find things that, the cover of the books look very different from one another, I write the science fiction.
Okay.
The other guy writes his stuff, and it's,
right.
perfectly legitimate, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But don't get us confused.
Okay. So everyone listening, take note of that. You don't want to wind up reading the wrong thing, something you didn't expect to read.
Exactly. After listening to me talking and then reading one of those books, you might think, hang on a minute, what the heck?
Sure. True.
It's German stuff.
Yeah, true. All right, then, cool. So then, in closing then, our guest is Toby Weston, and he's the author of the Singularity children's series, of which Book 4, Reimagination, is coming out on August 21st. And you can get this on Amazon. So, Toby, thank you very much for being an AuthorStory. It was a lot of fun speaking with you.
It was great. Yeah, thank you for having me. And I look forward to talking again, maybe when I've got the next one out. But you might have to wait 2 or 3 years. I'm a pretty slow writer. But no, thanks very much. It was really good fun.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right, everyone. So check out Toby Weston, the science fiction writer, mind you, Toby Weston, science fiction writer, and the Singularity children's series. And by all means, comment below, subscribe, and join us to listen to the people and the stories we've covered in the past, as well as those we'll cover in the future. So see you guys next time on AuthorStory, where we get to talk to another guest about their most interesting story.